friends, welcome back to my channel. It is Megan, and today we're going to be talking about the book and the movie of The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger. So as you all know, last month I read The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger for the Owl's Magical Readathon, and I did not like it. I think I gave it 2 stars just because it was entertaining enough to keep me going through the whole book, but there was a lot of problems or aspects of the book that I just did not like, and it just was not my personal preference of book. So just to review, The Time Traveler's Wife is about Henry and Claire, who have the misfortune of being in a romance where Henry is always forced unexpectedly to disappear and travel in time, and Claire is left behind, and their problems in that kind of relationship. Now, there are many reasons that I just did not find the book to my liking, but I have 6 reasons that I'd like to touch on specifically. And the first one is just the concept of the relationship and how they met. The whole concept is based on Henry when he's in his 30s or 40s, I believe, and he goes back in time and meets Claire as a 6-year-old, and they form a relationship between himself and a younger Claire, because Henry in the future marries Claire, but he goes back in time to try to form a relationship with Claire, and there's just this whole idea of whether or not they're together because Henry did that, or Henry did that because they're together. It's just this toss-up that's really weird, and it really makes you question the laws of fate and love and destiny and time travel, and what would happen if Claire chose to not be with him, and just that whole idea of, are they really supposed to be together, or are they just together because they have to be or forced to be? So it's sort of like an instant love, and it's a really unnatural kind of love, and it's definitely not my favorite kind of trope in a relationship. I love relationships that have a slow burn, or at least where they get to know each other a little more. There's really no aspect of them learning about each other simultaneously. It's more Claire learning about Henry when she's young, and Henry learning about Claire when he's older after Claire finds him. It's just this really weird relationship, but the weirdest part of it is Claire first meets him as a man that is 40, and he is completely unclothed, and she just accepts this and never tells anyone, and that whole idea of a 6-year-old befriending a naked 40-year-old man is just really uncomfortable to me. So that's my biggest problem with this whole book, is the concept is built around a 40-year-old man having a relationship with a 6-year-old girl. I get that it's his wife, but at the same time, she's a child, so it's this weird dynamic of, should he treat her as a future lover or as a child? And there's a lot of boundaries crossed, I believe, in that kind of relationship that shouldn't have been, and really on both sides, like both Claire and Henry cross those boundaries, but I don't know, it was just a really uncomfortable, creepy concept. So the first reason was the unnatural relationship, the second reason was the entire creepy concept, and my third reason is just the writing style makes the timeline very, very confusing to follow. In the book, it will say, like, the date, and then it will put in parentheses, Henry is blank years old, Claire is blank years old, and then if there's Henry time traveling, it'll have Henry twice. So it's just this really hard timeline to follow, and you're not sure if you're trying to follow Henry now or Henry in the past, but really you're trying to follow all of it, and I'm probably being very confusing just trying to explain this timeline. And there's a lot of things that happen in the book that spoil things for later in the book, so not only is it confusing because you're like, is this a spoiler or did this already happen, but it also kind of lessens the impact of when the thing actually happens. So that's just not a very good aspect of the book. My fourth and fifth reasons are kind of intertwined. My fourth reason is the time travel aspect and the rules behind time traveling. There really aren't any rules in this time traveling aspect of the book. The only rules are that he can't take anything that is not part of his body. Essentially, he leaves any clothing, anything he's holding, anything around him completely behind and just travels to wherever, whenever, naked. He even loses his like crowns on his teeth. I think it's like the silver cuspids or whatever they're called, but the things that you get on your teeth if you have to fill them in and they're like filling. Oh, I think it's just the fillings, but he loses those when he travels. So he literally cannot take anything that is not part of him originally. So that was just a weird concept because wherever he went, he just showed up naked, which kind of plays back into the creepy concept. And then also along with the rules of time travel, there is no rhyme or reason to the time traveling, which I get is supposed to be the idea of the book, but it just didn't sit well with me because I like reasons and I like knowing why something is happening, and there was just no explanation or reasoning behind any of it. So, And also, Henry had no control over what happened in the past. There was like this concept that he couldn't change the past, but there is a scene where he takes lottery numbers and wins a lottery. So I'm just confused about the entire rules on that because he kind of changed his future by playing the lottery. So I don't understand what things he can change and what he can't change if he's not supposed to be able to change anything. Like, there's no consistency in his rules. And then reason number 5 is I wish the time traveling was more explored. In the end, I started to get a little more invested in the book with his daughter being able to time travel and her figuring out, like, she had more control over her time travel. So I wish we had gotten more of the science behind that, or met more people who could time travel, or anything more related to that aspect of the science behind and the reasons why behind time traveling. And they just weren't explored as much as I would have liked. And lastly, the reason I just really didn't like this book was for the characters. Henry was somewhat okay. He kind of sucked as a person with Ingrid and her friend, but he seemed okay later on, except for the whole convincing a 6-year-old to love him and be in a relationship with him in the future kind of thing. Claire is kind of There's a line that she says about adoption, about how adoption is faking it, and that did not sit comfortably with me at all because that is such an insult to that whole community of adoption and foster care, anyone who's been adopted or anyone who has adopted. That's just a very insulting thing to say, and I understand what she meant, but it came off really rude, and I just that didn't sit well with me at all, and it made me really not like Claire. And I also hated Gomez and Charisse, I think that's her name, Gomez's wife. She knows that Gomez is in love with Claire, but she chooses to stay with him, and I don't really understand why. Those are the 6 reasons I just did not like the book. So now on to the movie. The movie was even worse for me because it was essentially the book but stripped down to the worst parts of the book. There were some good aspects in the book, such as Claire's family and that kind of situation with learning to deal with her mother. There was the good aspects of Alba and learning to control the time traveling. There was the aspect of sexual assault and dealing with the grief from that. And there was aspects of Henry learning and taking care of his younger self in time travel. But all of those aspects were not explored, and it was mainly the 6 reasons that I hated the book that were explored in the movie, so the movie was just not my favorite at all. So now I'm going to put this down, and I'm going to go through the differences between the book and the movie. Now overall, the movie, as I said, was the stripped down of the worst parts of the book version, and it was ultimately very confusing that because of the lack of backstory behind Claire and Henry, we don't really understand why they're together, and we never really build that understanding of why they're so crazy about each other, why they should be together, and it really plays a bigger role in, are they together because they want to be or together because they have to be? And Claire was a lot more angry about the situation in the movie, so it just really played into that, why are they together? And rather than a story about the difficulties of romance, it was more like a story of why are they together in the first place, they should just break up kind of thing. I have about 9 differences that I think are worthy of discussing between the book and the movie. The first one is the first time we see Henry time travel. He goes back in time and he goes to a place that he's really comfortable with, and he meets his older self, and he really discovers and feels safe in that kind of situation. Whereas when the crash happens that kills his mother, and I think that the book version is better, and just seeing Henry being there for himself and learning to deal with it was a lot more impactful than him dealing with that and also watching his mother die. I think it was more of a anxious thing for him than a random thing for him. The next thing we see is Henry in the book gives Claire a diary that he uses to tell her when they would next meet and like what date he's going to come back next. So in the book, it was a present from Henry to Claire, and they used it to meet. But in the movie, it was used as Claire's personal diary, and when Henry tried to look through it, she got really upset. So it made it extra confusing to how Henry knew when to tell Claire to come back, because that aspect of it was kind of ruined when Claire got upset and protective over the diary, even though in the movie she's trying to convince him to be with her, but she doesn't want her personal space invaded like at all, or like to be learned about. So it was just weird. The next thing is there's a lot of characters in this book that were discussed and very important to the story that weren't even brought up at all in the movie, and I understand that there's aspects of the book that you can't always bring into the movie just from time restraint, but I feel like some of these characters were really important to the plot. For example, Ingrid I felt was very important just because she was still dating Henry when he met Claire in the book, and then he met Claire and he kind of just put Ingrid off, and there's this whole thing about Ingrid and her friend kind of trying to warn Claire, and there's Claire's mom and the rest of Claire's family, and this is tying into my next point. I feel that Claire's family really played a lot into her backstory, and we didn't really get to see much of Claire's backstory as well as Henry's. We didn't get really much of his backstory either, other than his mom dying. But there's a woman that was very close to Henry and helped raise him alongside his father, and his father was very distant, but we kind of get that in the movie, but not as much as we should have. And Claire's family is very broken and troubled. Her mom is very depressed, and I feel like she might have like a bipolar disorder if I remember correctly, but she has some sort of mental disability that wreaks havoc in the family, and her brother got a girl pregnant, and there's just a whole assortment of things that happen in her family that really reflect on her as a person that aren't explored in the movie at all, that happen in the book, and I think they really diminished Claire as a character in the movie. Another difference between the book and the movie as far as characters go is Gomez. In the book, Gomez is actually very in love with Claire. They were together in that way back in college before Claire and Henry met for the first time when they were like the same or close in age. So she had been with Gomez when he cheated on her with her friend, and then he just has this deep infatuation with her throughout the whole book, and he's just waiting for Henry to die so he can kind of take over. And then after he dies, then Claire sleeps with Gomez again while he's married with kids to her friend, just so that she can fantasize about being with Henry. And that whole relationship is just so weird, and I don't like Gomez at all. But in the movie, there's just no mention of that at all. He's just kind of there as her friend's husband, which he should have been from the start. The next difference is the way that Claire gets pregnant. It was kind of a mutual agreement between Henry and Claire that Henry came back in time and he was with her. So she had so many miscarriages that Henry decided that he was going to get a vasectomy because she came so close to almost dying and during some of the miscarriages, I believe. And he didn't want to continue to hurt her or feel that hurt of a miscarriage again. So he decided he was going to get a vasectomy. And she felt very traumatized by that. They had a huge fight about it. And in the book, they came to an agreement that she was going to allow him to get a vasectomy and do it out of celebration for coming to an agreement. And then he travels back in time, or travels forward in time, I think, and does it with her, and she gets pregnant through that. Whereas in the movie, she kind of goes behind his back and scouts him out during one of his time traveling episodes and explains that she's in a fight and she just wants to have a child or whatever. It was just so weird in the movie. It felt like, in the book it kind of felt weird, but in the movie it just felt like she was going behind his back and having an affair with him. It was weird concepts. The last three differences in the book to movies are when Henry loses his feet in the book, it is so much more impactful. He never loses his feet in the movie. In the book, it really, really discusses his intense love for being able to run and his feeling of control over his body and everything when he's running. And losing his feet was such an important and impactful point of the book that he felt like he lost part of himself, but he felt like he lost such a big part of himself that he felt like he couldn't go on. And whenever he time traveled, he couldn't move. Whereas in the movie, he kind of lost the feeling in his feet and he just was in a wheelchair. He didn't actually get his feet amputated. So he was still able to kind of crawl around and stuff, whereas in the book, he actually got his feet amputated, I think up to his knees. So he was just kind of dealing with that kind of body. The second to last reason is Henry's death in the book felt a lot more impactful. In the movie, it just felt like rushed and weird, whereas in the book it was more kind of explained. And then the last reason is the ending. So in the ending of the book, Henry writes a letter to Claire to stay hopeful, to move on, but to know that in the future he will see her again. And then he is like 30 or 40, he travels forward in time to when Claire is 82, and the book ends with them embracing, and I kind of pictured that as Claire finally dying and resting, and together they move on to another world. Whereas in the movie, we last see Henry meeting Alba and the meadow where he used to meet Claire when she was younger, and the kids run and get Claire, and Claire runs and embraces him one last time, and then she picks up his clothing from the meadow knowing that was the last time she's gonna see him. And I think both were very impactful for different reasons. I think the book one was more of a closure for Henry, knowing he would see her again, be able to hold her one last time, even though he had already died, it was hope for him, and seeing her again. Whereas the movie was more of a closure for Claire, because in the book, she knew she would see him again when she was older, so I don't think she ever really got to move on. Whereas in the movie, she got that closure closer to his death, and she was probably able to move on from that after that meeting and knowing that was the last time. So overall, I think there was a lot of things discussed about these books. It definitely was not my favorite book or movie, but I do think they had some impactful moments that were worth talking about. But this felt more like a rant than a review, so take it for what it is. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you thought of both the book and the movie for The Time Traveler's Wife down below in the comments, and I will check in with you guys in my next video. Bye!